Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come to this meeting. My name is Steven Sobolewski. I use he, him pronouns, and I am one of the stage management counselors. I am based in Amiskwaciwaskahagan, or colloquially known as Edmonton, and I'm zooming into you from the Papastay ward in my city. So one of the things that was brought up to the council was that it would be really nice to just have a little meeting to connect stage management members and the negotiating committee and staff to talk about a lot of the changes that have happened in the CTA. And so that's what today is. How it's going to work is if you have questions, please submit them in either the chat or the Q&A function, and I will just sort of ask our lovely other panelists here. Randy is also going to throw into the chat the ratified CTA. So if you have a question about specifically something in the ratifications, please make sure to reference the specific clause. I would also just love to take a second to introduce our lovely people on our panel. I guess we'll just popcorn it, and I'll just start with Jessica. If you just want to say your name and your pronouns and where you are.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Severin. I use she, they pronouns. I'm based here in Toronto. I work primarily in musical theater and opera as a stage manager. I'll throw it to Margaret.
Hello, I'm Margaret Thompson. I am the Theater Agreements Business Representatives Manager at Equity. I'm a she, her pronouns, and I've met lots of you before, but for those of I haven't, it's great to meet you all again. Meghan. Froebelius.
I'm Meghan Froebelius. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a stage manager based in Toronto. The majority of my experience is with festivals, but now it's, I guess, with other theaters in Toronto. So yes, okay. Other Meghan.
Hello, my name is Meghan, she, her pronouns, based in Toronto. Stage manager, mostly plays, sometimes opera, various things, and I'm currently the chair of the Equity Stage Management Committee. Toss it over to Arden.
Hi, everybody. I'm Arden. I'm the executive director. I use she, her, elle pronouns. And I'll turn it back to Steven. Steven is going to be our host for this meeting this afternoon. So Steven, over to you.
Thank you. We also have Randy, who again is sort of just throwing things in the chat as we need, including the ratification package and the CTA fee booklet that has been updated. Before we dive into the Q&A, I just think it's kind of important that we give some context as to why specifically these things were brought up and these things were added to the CTA. So I'd love to maybe just throw it over to Arden and Margaret just to sort of talk about the negotiation, specifically why these specific issues were negotiated.
That's great. Thank you, Steven. As I'm sure many of you know, we collect up information throughout the life of a collective agreement. If problems arise, we make a note, we put it aside. If there's a request for an easement or a modification in the agreement, some kind of concession, we track all of those. We make notes and we put those aside. And certainly when we have conversations with members and or engagers and they say something isn't clear or something isn't working, we collect up all of that information too. And that is one of the things that provides us with the basis of materials to go forward. As well, particularly in certain cases like yours, we reach out to the members themselves, the committee members in this case, and say, anything that you've got that you'd really like for us to try and put on the table. And so what was clear in this round of negotiations was that there were some significant problems with respect to controlling the number of hours that stage managers work for a variety of reasons, that the hours were becoming burdensome, that there was little respect for stage management's personal time, lunch breaks, managing their own schedule, to the point where there were a lot of people who were just finding the workplace a very difficult place to be. And as you know, we lost a lot of stage managers over the pandemic who chose to leave the business entirely. So one of our biggest concerns was addressing some of the issues around work-life balance. And that led us specifically to issues around personal leave, to trying to put some teeth into how much work a stage manager can be asked to do on their breaks, and to incorporate something that had happened on the Lion King, on Harry Potter, where Mervish effectively had some occasional stage managers, swing stage managers, who were trained up to be able to come in and provide relief. And we were interested to see whether or not we could build that in as a pilot project, because it doesn't work for every show, but certainly very large shows. I believe that our members who worked on that show found it extremely helpful once we got that into place. And so that was the driving force behind a lot of what we put on the table. It's important to say that in all cases, we put way more stuff on the table than we ever get. We gave them 90 pages worth of material. Now, that was basically 90 different proposals. Of course, that covered everything. But we always start with anything that we think we might reasonably be able to accomplish, and it goes onto the table. Inevitably, we don't get everything, and we don't get everything exactly the way we want it. But in some cases, and I'll use the example of the overnight rest, we had, of course, asked for that to be extended by an hour. They wouldn't agree to an hour. They would agree to a half hour. And so we took the damn half hour because it's better than what it was. It wasn't what we wanted, but it was an improvement. And that's really how you go forward in negotiations. You try not to, as they say, leave money on the table. You can't get everything. You get the improvement, and then you go back the next time and try and expand on that. So what you see in the ratification document was the result of extensive hours of negotiations at the table. We spent a great deal of time talking about stage management issues, as well as director and choreographer issues. Those were probably the areas where we spent the most of our time trying to ensure that at least what we got met our members' needs. Margaret, is there anything that you want to add to that sort of contextualization?
I mean, I think that's very thorough, Arden. We start compiling the matrix, as I call it, as soon as the new agreement comes into place. I've already started one for 2027 with feedback that's coming in. So it was a fairly large document that we shared with our negotiating team once we confirmed who those members were going to be, and really tried to pinpoint, okay, what are our priorities and what is actually achievable in this round of negotiations. And there are some things that PACT wasn't willing to discuss. There were some things that we had to pull off the table. There's some things we put on the table knowing that PACT wouldn't want to discuss them. I'm thinking about, contract renewals, like we were wanting to talk about that for stage management, but we put it out there in notice of renewals to have that conversation, to be able to say that there are folks who work at theaters year in and year out and don't know if their job is coming back. And we need to sort of think about those people as people and their lives and their livelihood. And it's important to recognize that, even if we didn't get something in the agreement this time. But, I think all in all, it was a pretty successful round of bargaining.
Great, thank you. So I have a few questions I'd love to start with. And on the topic of, stage management time and, that work-life balance, I'd love to just maybe clarify how Article 63XX, the personal leave for stage managers, and something like the pilot program for occasional stage managers, how that all sort of works and how one is maybe different from emergency leave and so on.
Who wants to take that question? It's a very good one.
I think, Jess, if you're fine, I think we can share these as we go. But I'm just going to take a minute to pull them up so that you have the right one in front of me.
I think for Donna in the chat, we're talking about 63XX personal leave, emergency replacements, and the pilot project that's proposed as I think it's a side letter at the end of the ratification package.
Yes, it's like
talking about,
X.
yeah. So we'll just scroll down.
And you want to talk about short-term replacement and personal leave, correct?
Yeah,
Steven?
and just sort of how they differ.
Yeah.
I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to be flipping to my binder as well, and the notes that I take.
Yeah.
Some of these conversations feel like they happened 1,000 years ago. So forgive me if I don't remember all the details of the back and forth with PAC. And please, anybody on the panel, jump in if I'm misspeaking. But I think as an overarching idea, the feedback that we got from the SM committee and from the community was that there needed to be more options for people to work under contract on insurance and be able to take days off, so that people weren't paying subs under the table. Not that any of us would have done that, but that people were on contract and having an official channel they could use to book things off, either personal commitments, a wedding, a birthday, a medical appointment, without it having to be done sort of under the table. So I think that was sort of the focus of some of this going into it, which I think was PACT was receptive to. I don't feel like there was a lot of resistance to it. So we wanted to sort of specify a couple of different streams that could happen. One would be a planned personal day. One would be an emergency replacement when you couldn't, either due to illness or injury or a family situation, you couldn't anticipate being off. And then the third, which is the pilot project, which relates to sort of what was done on Harry Potter, was, is it possible to have a trained group of people who might not have guaranteed employment, but have learned the tracks in a show, and what does learning the track constitute, and what kind of protections could be put in for them. So that was sort of the framework going into it.
These are three different circumstances, right? There are circumstances where there is an emergency situation, and the conditions previously that existed, meaning bringing somebody in for 2 weeks, they had to be paid. People, it was discouraging people, I think, from stepping out when they needed to step out in those circumstances. And it made it harder for the engager, given that there is a labor shortage anyway. So we wanted to try and tackle these things separately. How do we deal with an emergency? How do we make it easy for the engager to bring someone in a genuine emergency so that somebody can step out? How do we deal with a personal leave, which is not an emergency, as Jessica said, would happen on a longer show, and that's a completely different approach. And then, of course, there was this pilot project. So there were three pretty significant conceptual ideas, I think, for the engager even to get their head around as to how they were different, because they were confusing personal leave and emergency leave in some cases. And we had to make it very clear to them, no. We have very distinct circumstances here, all of which we're trying to address.
Mm-hmm. The idea wasn't for us, just so I'm clear, wasn't for us to go through them, right? It was just to answer the context as to why. Okay, great.
But if you wanted to go into each of them a little deeper, you're more than welcome to.
I just want to touch on the occasional stage managers proposal, because I think that in a lot of the language surrounding the ratification package, it's referred to only as swings. And we had a lot of conversations about this proposal that there could be uses for this beyond just stage management swings. For example, like there's a section that says if two stage managers want to use this as job sharing, it can be, but it can't be brought on by the theater. But so just to say that because it's a pilot project, you shouldn't limit yourself to thinking of this as a stage management swing clause. Think of it as the sky's the limit. If you can, make the language work for a scenario that you want to do, propose it. And, maybe the next time when language is actually put into the CTA, it can support those scenarios.
One of the things that I think the whole team was really good at, but Meghan certainly spearheaded, was the idea of what do we need to establish as like minimum training for learning a track, either in performance or covering a rehearsal. So those things are all spelled out in each of those three circumstances. The idea of notice of a personal of a person taking personal leave, or how long an occasional stage manager could be considered trained on a track. Are also, we tried to have some good language to support people in that it's not sort of, 5 years from now, you can't be asked to run stage right because you ran it once. But how long the window would be in terms of you being considered safe on a track. And some of these things might be specific to either cities that have a big community of stage managers, or long-running shows that might have a larger team of stage managers. But we really hoped that it would give some options for everybody in every kind of circumstance to have coverage, to be able to take a day off and have their replacement be covered by a contract and insurance and training. So I think I'd feel more comfortable answering specific questions than walking through the whole clause, but I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, does anybody in the chat or the Q&A have any specific questions about personal leave, emergency replacement, or the pilot program?
I do want to note that, particularly in terms of the pilot program, there is a requirement to track data. It's really, really important for all of us to know how it's being used, if it's being used well, if we've left something out. So Meghan, for example, talked about the possibility of job sharing. You could see a circumstance where perhaps in a smaller center where there aren't as many available stage managers, that being able to job share might actually make it possible for stage managers to stay in the business or balance their other work opportunities in some way. And so we would definitely want to know, did it work? How did it work? Any issues that there are. We talk about the data tracking, and the theater agrees to tell us, but we really want to hear from our members as well as to what they've encountered when they've done this, so that we know whether or not we're on the right track, if we need to build in any other kinds of safeguards or conditions in order to go forward, or if in fact anybody uses it at all. So I would say that would also be true for the personal leave, because this is a brand new notion for a lot of our engagers. We really need to hear from our members as to how it is or isn't working, and if you're getting any kind of pushback from any of the engagers when you attempt to use that clause.
I would also like to encourage that for the emergency replacement clause as well, because I know there's the end of the clause allows for theaters to engage non-member stage managers in the case of emergencies. And we were assured that that does not happen often, and it really is emergency only. So if you're finding that that's happening often, provide the data so that we can take it out.
Who should people contact and provide that data to? How should they give that feedback?
Me, please.
We have some questions in the chat. So starting with Troy, Is there specific language on if it is the responsibility of the engager or the SM to find the replacement? Is the SM database of who is not on contract to be used?
I can take that. There's no specific language. You know, the theater could request the SM availability list. I do always preface that it's strictly pulled from who is or is not on contract in our database. So a stage manager who has another commitment, that's not necessarily gonna, it might pull them as available as when they're not. So there is a margin of error in that list. But there's no specific language on who is to find that person. The stage manager themselves could know of a colleague who may be interested. The theater may know of someone who's approached them for work. It could work either way.
Another question is, could the occasional stage manager be someone who works for a company as, say, a production manager or company manager, but who has equity SM experience to step into the tracks when needed?
For the occasional stage manager pilot project, no, because an employee of the company, someone who has theater management responsibilities is not, that's a prohibited duty under stage management. There's an innate conflict of interest there. So not for that pilot project. That wouldn't be the intention of that pilot project, to flesh out the duties of an existing employee. I can see certainly in an emergency replacement situation where if the production manager or company manager was the most suitable person to step in that emergency situation, where we would allow that, where we have allowed that in the past for the safe running of the show, but that's not the intention of the occasional stage manager project. Megan?
Would that be the case, Margaret, if somebody was a company manager, let's say at Canadian Stage, and they wanted to be an occasional SM at Mirvish? Would that still be a conflict?
I've never had that come up. I'd have to think about that one.
Yeah, because is it only a conflict if it's the same theater?
Yeah, they're not supposed to be someone who has any theater management duties or responsibilities at all.
At any theater?
Doesn't say, but again, that's never something that's come across me. I don't know how the company manager at Canadian Stage would have time to be an occasional stage manager at Mirvish, but yeah, you never know.
Question from the Q&A. In the case where two SMs can't be found and a non-member is engaged, who has oversight of making sure those two SMs were contracted?
Yeah.
The question being that who is proving that the theater did its due diligence to try to hire members first? Is that the question?
I believe so, yes.
We would ask, the business representative would ask the theater to provide the names of the equity stage managers they contacted and were unavailable.
And then another question from the Q&A. So to be clear, if a stage manager doesn't want to job share production unless it is an emergency or personal situation, an engager can't necessarily make it part of the contract.
That is correct. Absolutely.
And then another comment / question from Craig. In the past, I dropped out of a tour at its beginning due to a sudden medical diagnosis that required 3 months treatment. I found a replacement. In this new scenario, would my insurance coverage continue for those 3 months?
Yes, Craig, the two things really are kind of exclusive. How you were replaced during the production is irrelevant to whether or not you are eligible for the insurance. So there would be no issue. Personal leave would be a little bit difficult because insurance covers medical issues. It doesn't cover personal leave necessarily. So I have to make that distinctions. But your question was a medical diagnosis that required treatment. if the same kind of thing were to happen, you should be eligible to continue on insurance regardless of how you're replaced.
Any other questions about personal leave, emergency replacement, or even the pilot program? Okay, if they come up, we can always circle back. One question I know that I think Margaret in particular, and a few of us have been having, is a question about the span of day when it comes to a 5-hour rehearsal. So I'm talking about two separate clauses. So the first clause is clause 6318G. And that is the stage management meal break, which says that after 5 hours, the stage manager must take an hour meal break, and that 5 hours is inclusive of prep. But if we go to Article 24, give me 1 second, 2404D, when it talks about a 5-hour day, it says that there must be a meal break of 30 minutes sometime in the rehearsal. So I'm wondering if we could just get some clarification about when does the stage manager actually take their break?
The meal break specifically? Yeah.
Yes, the meal break.
Okay, so I think this this scenario has come up already. So theoretically, the theater could ask the stage manager to do their hour of prep, take the meal break, and then do the 5-hour day, or the opposite, do the 5-hour day, take a meal break, and then do their hour of prep, if they don't want to pay the overtime, which isn't a great scenario. But that's what it means. If the theater approved the overtime, then the stage manager would get a 1 hour of regular overtime for the hour of prep that they did that day.
Sorry, I think you mean 2404B, Stephen, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. And so, Megan, you said it's come up already. What did the engager suggest?
It hasn't come up with me, but it was more the question of, since the coffee break in 2404B doesn't count as a meal break, on any 5-hour rehearsal day, stage managers could theoretically automatically incur a meal break infringement because of prep. So the question that was asked is if a 5-hour call would automatically incur overtime. So if you were to work a scenario where you, like, let's say you would work as a stage manager 11:30 to noon, half-hour of prep, 12 to 5 hours of rehearsal, and then you went immediately into 5 to 5:30, a half-hour of prep, you would have worked a total of 6 hours and you would incur 1 hour of regular overtime. But I think the complicated part now from this new clause is that the theater could reject that overtime and say, no, you have to work 10:30 to 11 prep, take an 11 to 12 meal break, do a 12 to 5 rehearsal, and then have another 5 to 6 p.m. meal break, and then do your next half-hour of prep, and that would incur 0 hours of overtime, which is quite complicated. You could be right, Alan. Yes, I was just kind of speaking. Yeah. Margaret can speak to that.
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm wondering, one question we have in the Q&A is essentially how does this then how does this work with this new philosophy of work-life balance? Because if it's a 5-hour day, but the engager is telling us that we don't want to approve your overtime, you have to take an hour break either before or after the rehearsal. Like, I guess maybe some discussion about maybe how, I guess just how does it make lives better for SMs?
I think we would probably be in touch with the engager and in touch with PAC to say that was not the intention of the clause. That was not the discussion at the table. The intention was not to inadvertently create an extended nonsensical schedule for someone just so that you can avoid paying a little bit of overtime. That was not the point. There was supposed to be a recognition at the table that some of the changes that were being made to stage management were likely going to cost them money. We certainly had that conversation when we talked about any kind of work being done during the meal break. And there was a recognition on the part of the other side that some of these changes we were making were going to cost them money unless they learned to schedule differently. That it wasn't just a question of we change the rules and they have to, pay it. No, the idea is to think about how they manage their workplace differently. And so if that were to happen, Steven, Margaret and or I would be on to them pretty quickly and on to PAC to have that conversation, because that was not the intention. The intention was to drive some change in the workplace.
Thank you. One question that's also come up is a question about a 5-hour musical theater day. And so how does this new 30-minute break kind of work with the 30-minute mandated break? Are they the same thing or are they different?
Sorry, I'm not sure that I understood that question. I don't know if anybody else was unclear too a little bit.
Are you asking, Melissa, if that supersedes the rule for 15 minutes within 2 hours for musical theater?
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that.
The discussion at the table was that that if it was a 5-hour call, regardless what you were rehearsing, this superseded that. It's not an exemption in Article 53.
Going back to the chat from Laura Lee, for a 10 out of 12 day broken into 2 5-hour chunks, our stage manager is expected to prep, take lunch, do 5 hours, then have the additional lunch with the whole company.
No, no, that applicable 30-minute meal break is only on or coffee break, mandated 30-minute break on a 5-hour call is strictly for a day that is a 5-hour call.
To that, can someone on the panel maybe speak to how the 5 hours of rehearsal, including prep, affects a extended rehearsal day into 5-hour chunks and also the allowable 5 hours on a performance day?
It's not applicable to a performance day at all, Megan. It's strictly about rehearsal hours. We did have that discussion at the table because
sorry, I mean the because rehearsal, you're allowed to rehearse on a performance day for up to 5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So this prep and rehearsal 5-hour combo overtime situation would affect rehearsal on a performance day as well.
Yes. So you'd have to bill for the applicable overtime.
I think everybody's concern is that stage manager or theaters have to approve the overtime. So even though, like, if we have this conversation or you have this conversation with theaters and say that wasn't the intention, I think the unfortunate thing is the language is ratified, and so they could still exercise their right to make us work that strange day. Is that correct?
Well, technically, there's nothing in the agreement that says that they can't. But as I said, I think we would, we'd have to deal with that. Like that isn't in anybody's best interest. It's not in the theater's best interest. It doesn't help the process. It doesn't improve the rehearsal schedule. Like that's just not good for anybody. It's stupid. That doesn't mean that there isn't somebody somewhere who might not try to do it someday because they think they're being clever. But I guess we'll have to deal with that when it happens. We had quite a lot of conversation at the table as well about the fact that there were a number of theaters who made it clear to stage management that they were not to put any kind of overtime on their timesheets. And we made it clear to the engager that we knew exactly who those theaters were. And the day will come when we can send the Ministry of Labor in to have a look at those timesheets. And there is not an inspector in the world who's going to imagine that it was impossible that no overtime ever happened, ever in the history of that theater. So I don't know, but I'm sure that there will be somebody who will try and get clever and try and do that and let us know immediately, and we'll take it up with the theater. Because that was, as I said, not the intention whatsoever. We didn't put in the agreement, thou shalt not break up the prep in this way in order to avoid overtime. But as I said, the people at the table were aware of the fact that these changes were going to cost them more money unless they looked at how they were managing their days differently.
I think there was a hope too that this change in language, which there are all sorts of really specific circumstances, and I hope we can help people figure out the equations here for billing and for overtime so that we all have examples for timesheets. But I think the hope was that clarifying the language would give people something to push back with, because the unspoken practice had been that 5 hours of rehearsal was 6.5 hours work for a stage manager. And so trying to get that to line up with Employment Standards Act and to line up with crew calls and just the idea that 5 hours work is 5 hours work was the hope with this. Are there still things we're going to have to figure out that we haven't yet? Absolutely. But I think that none of us would work in a crew situation where we expected them to work 6.5 hours when they were scheduled for 5. And to try to get those things to align.
Guess you just cut out the last bit of it.
I know, I'm sorry, my internet is being a pain today. I was just saying, that it may not answer the specific situation, but we did want to try to bring that idea of invisible labor into the agreement.
I'm wondering, just based on a comment from the chat, if we could maybe just walk through the correct way to charge for overtime in this 5 hour scenario.
Margaret, I'm just gonna send this to you first, and can you look at it before I send it to everybody, because I've typed it out. Thank you. Oops.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just put it there. I don't know what the code is off the top of my head for double overtime.
Which line of the fee schedule it is, or
No, on the
on
time.
the timesheet? Oh, not off the top of my head, no. Thanks,
Yeah.
Alan.
We've had some questions in the Q&A just around sort of what is the ideal engagers, what would be ideal for engagers to schedule? So one question, for instance, is, so the ideal would be for the engager to schedule 4 hours of rehearsal on a 5-hour day. And then a second question we have is the idea that the theater should schedule only a 3.5-hour rehearsal day so that stage managers work a 5-hour day if they want to shorten the days?
I think that would only be if the theater was trying to avoid paying overtime.
It's really going to depend on the individual show, what's being scheduled, why it's being scheduled that way. You know, I can see times when there's a good reason to only want to do a short day. And that short day may include everybody. There are times when, I don't know, maybe there's less prep and it can be done in this period of time. I don't know. I mean, all of that's really going to depend. The reason why people would only choose a 5-hour rehearsal block really is dependent on the material as much as anything else. So I don't know that there's an ideal way of managing that.
I also will say, just to go off of your comment, Catherine, we had a lot of conversation at the table that the theaters don't seem to understand how much extra work stage managers do to get things done for rehearsal. We had those conversations surrounding computers, surrounding this overtime, like surrounding prep. People don't understand that we often, because we love what we do, are forced to make choices that void what we are actually owed. And so I think that in this situation, unfortunately, if the theater rejects the overtime, we as stage managers will have to say, then we're not coming in before rehearsal because I'm not working an hour of prep for free. And it does put us in an unfortunate position to do that, but I don't think that our engagers will fully understand what we do or what we're worth until we collectively stop doing more for free.
And the options of having a day where you had a 2-hour call, an hour meal break, and then you work 3 hours in the afternoon, great. There's nothing against that kind of 5-hour day spread out over 6. I don't think I'm misspeaking. There's the last thing we wanted to do was limit ways that that everybody could have a better work-life balance, but we did want to make sure that the onus was on the people who were handing us a schedule with a set amount of time and resources already decided. It's like, great, here are your 2 options. You pay the overtime or you have longer rehearsal weeks. You have a different production schedule. It can't always fall on us doing the work. For free.
Thank you all for this really wonderful conversation. Are there any more questions about these 2 specific clauses? From Craig, 5-hour days and prorated contracts seem to be gaining popularity. I was hired last season on one. Engager kindly did not prorate the SM fees though they did with the actors, which I agreed with. Just because the day is shorter, we still will have the same paperwork. But I don't see language that is effective to that effect here. Is SM fee prorated or full weekly fee? And so, Craig, are you asking if your engager chooses to do a 5-hour day as the norm for your week? Are you asking if that is now prorated? Yeah.
Or are you asking about what a stage man? Oh, okay, so prorated rehearsal schedule. Is that what you're asking about, Craig? You had a prorated rehearsal schedule? So in that case, you'll see in 2406, that yes, both the stage manager and actors' fees can be prorated in the same proportions. However, stage management prep, the allowable prep is reduced to 1 hour per day. That is included in the prorated fee. And then should you require additional prep, that would have to be paid as additional services. And should the theater require rehearsal hours in excess of those allowed, depending on the proration ratio, that also incurs additional services. Is that clear? Maybe scroll to the table, Randy. So you can see we have this lovely little chart, which shows if your number of weekly contractual fees prorated over the number of engagement weeks, how many allowable rehearsal hours you have per week. So in a 1 week over 2, you're allowed 21 rehearsal hours per week. The SM prep is reduced to a maximum of 1 hour per day in any prorated week. So prep in excess of 1 hour per day is additional services. Rehearsal hours in excess of 21 hours per week are additional services.
Craig, does that answer your question? Thank you. Any other questions about the 5-hour day and the meal break? Okay, I would love to just open it up to any of the attendees. If you have any questions, please feel free to just throw them into the chat or the Q&A, and I will be happy to ask them.
Well, we're waiting for some rapid typing. This just came up when I was discussing the clause we were just talking about with a few people. When does this CTA take effect? And how does it affect, because the question came up where like companies have maybe already budgeted for their tech week next week, right? Without knowing that they're going to incur $75 of overtime per 5-hour day kind of thing. How does that work?
It's already in effect.
Great.
Yep.
Because the question was, does it affect, and maybe it's an obvious answer, but I love an obvious answer. Companies where you signed a contract when the previous CTA was in effect, this one came into effect at the specified date, and those are the rules now?
Yep. The one place
Right.
where there, and I've forgotten the clause number now, where they were unable to agree to make the change this year because it was going to have a very significant financial implication. So it only comes into effect in the 2nd and 3rd year of the agreement. So certainly there were some areas, particularly with respect to stage management, where the engager was aware of an impact that it might have on their budget. But no, it's the agreement is already in effect.
Thanks very much. And I believe that clause is the one regarding the overnight rest and extended days.
Yes, I'm trying to
And
remember.
that would come into effect at what date in 2025?
End of June.
Yeah, the new dates for the agreement are always around the end of June. We try and pick the beginning of a week rather than in the middle of a week, because that just makes all sorts of hellish things, changing the rates. So it's not the same date every year, but it's always usually the last Monday at the end of June when the new rates come in.
One question we just got in the Q&A is, if recommendations that I sent in for negotiations were not addressed, is there a way to find out why? Arden, you are on mute.
We don't always know who sent in the suggestions, but if you want to get in touch with us, you know, we're happy to let you know. As I said, we took all the materials that we had and all the suggestions that came in. We sat down with the negotiating team and we made some joint decisions about what we felt were the priorities, what we felt we could accomplish. And certainly there were some things that we put on the table that we didn't get. Margaret mentioned one of them, which was renewable contracts for stage management. So there may be some other things that came forward that for whatever reason didn't make it into the sets of proposals. That's always true. Not everything that comes in we're able to necessarily always get on the table. But if there is something specifically, please reach out to me or Margaret and let us know what it is, and we'll be happy to let you know.
Great. Question from Donna in the chat. We have engagers who are consistently scheduling tech weeks contrary to the CTA, a tech rehearsal starting voluntarily, stating voluntary costumes worn for performers, but they have contracted full wardrobe staff. Is Equity aware of this? And current SMS must comply or not be rehired. How can Equity take the lead?
Yeah, Margaret, you go.
I mean, we're only aware of what we know. So if, right, we're not sitting in the workplace in every theater across the country. And if someone doesn't bring a concern to us, it's not possible for us to be aware of it. If there's something like if there's a specific engager, who have you brought the concern to, Donna? Oh, Arden, you're on mute.
And when?
And when?
Yeah. It would be really helpful if that's happening for somebody to send us an email that day or the next day so that we can get onto the engager and see if we can find out what it is that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, I'm going to say, of all complaints. It's much easier. I know sometimes people feel uncomfortable bringing things forward during the production because they're concerned that it will be clear who it is that has brought it forward if Equity speaks to the engager. But I can assure you that, first of all, we don't pick up the phone and say to the engager, Donna told us X, Y, and Z was happening. We certainly don't do that. We do try, in some circumstances, if it is very specific, to try and confirm it with at least one other person on the production so that there's plausible deniability as to where the information came from. But we do, as I said, we try and deal with it immediately. In some cases, there is not necessarily a penalty associated with violations of the agreement. And so what we have to do is, I said, you know, speak to the engager and find out why it is that something has happened, and how far off the rules they have strayed. Well, that's opera, okay. Well, there are some different issues probably around opera. It's a different collective agreement, and I'd have to pull out the rules for voluntary costumes for the opera agreement to see what the exact language is, because it's different from here.
Question from the Q&A. On a contract where the theater and the production are in a province different from the contracted stage manager, is there a way to negotiate per diem as part of the fees, especially if accommodations and billets or other place where there is no kitchen, and considering our current increase in food due to inflation?
I mean, I would say, yes, everything above the minimums is negotiable. If, you know, if you want to ask for a meal allowance or accommodations that have specific amenities available, a kitchen, whatever it is you might need, then absolutely ask for it.
That was also a subject of a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
in the agreement, not just with respect to stage management, but with respect to all artists and the additional costs of finding accommodations. We didn't get much of anywhere, certainly, but I'm hoping we're going to be going to a joint administration committee for a resolution on how joint productions work. And one of the things that we suggested as a resolution for some of those issues included ideas around covering some accommodations. So we may have an opportunity to have another stab at engagers through that process, although that's specifically around joint productions, but we might be able to have another go at them.
We also spoke a lot about stage managers' right to negotiate in these rounds of negotiations, funny enough, just to go off of what Alan has said in the chat as well. And so you shouldn't take anything that's in the CTA as that's all you can get. Like, always ask for more is my advice. Like, if you want to ask for it, ask for it. And we said that in the room a lot.
Yeah, just to build off what Megan was saying, there was a really good conversation about the ways in which PACT and PACT engagers can show that they value the work of a stage manager. And the options that are not related to only paying minimum, so the conversations about laptops and laundry and overtime and scheduling and, things that could be negotiated that are outside of fees, I think was received well, but also felt like some people were hearing it for the first time ever, which was surprising.
Yeah, and also what was said in the room, which I agree was met with surprise, was the fact that minimums are minimums. And somebody who has been stage managing for 30 years should not be getting offered the same as somebody who is straight out of school. And the fact that a lot of stage managers are not offered above scale, it was a big conversation. So just ask for more.
Just to highlight something that Megan has thrown in the SM committee resources, there is a document that is about negotiation. And then there also is the link directly to the engagement contract negotiation resource. One question that just came in through the chat is, does the new language regarding laundry duties make it a requirement of the theater to provide an additional fee? So for those following, that is clause 6314, other duties. And then if you scroll down to B, it talks about laundry.
Yes. You have to be paid now for laundry. You can say no to it as well. That was another big thing we talked about. You don't have to agree to do laundry, but if you agree to it, they have to pay you for it. And you can ask for more.
And then just to maybe clarify a question I just have, when it says negotiate fair additional compensation, should we just use the minimums as stipulated in clause 1611, or is there an actual, like, where should we be turning to negotiate?
So the minimum that they have to pay you is the minimum additional duty fee. However, that should just be used as a starting point for negotiation. So if you as the stage manager, or the ASM often is the one doing the laundry, if you are being asked to do laundry and they're offering you $50 a week or whatever the new additional duty fee is, and then you read the script and there's going to be 25 actors and they each have 18 costumes and 40 wigs and whatever, figure out what a dresser would be paid for that week and ask for more.
There's a good question from Donna in the chat. Are apprentices covered in the laundry clauses? And I know not always. So what if the engager, instead of paying an ASM, decides to ask an apprentice to do laundry?
We had a lot of conversations about apprentices as well. And my understanding about any changes to the apprentice program. And Margaret or Arden, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but changes, because the apprentice program is written out in our bylaws, it has to be changed through an RCA. So we can't actually change it in the CTA. However, we had a lot of conversations at the table about how apprentices are treated by engagers and how apprentices should be used. And when it comes to stage managers, if you want to make sure that the apprentices who are apprenticing now actually move into being full stage managers, we have to allow them the chance to learn that job. And we had a lot of conversations that apprentices, the jobs that they're being asked to do are overshadowing jobs that ASMs and stage managers need to actually learn. And so that's why we put in the new language stipulating that anything like laundry or maintenance shouldn't supersede stage management specific duties. But no, it unfortunately, very unfortunately, does not apply to them.
There was a real focus when we were talking about directors and choreographers and apprentices and stage managers and all artists under the agreement that what we really wanted to work towards was that everybody knew what they were getting into, that your contract actually talked about the specific job description for that show. So if it meant that you were doing food prep as a ASM, if you were, you know, if there were laundry duties, if there was an expectation of a non-standard schedule, that that everything could be discussed, but that we couldn't make assumptions about what people would do after they'd signed a contract. That people, including apprentices, needed to have more transparency about their actual job description on that specific engagement. So I think that that was something that I can't remember the wording off the top of my head, but that we got into the apprentice discussion. The idea that they would know what they maybe have a fuller sense of what they were going to be doing on the show before they started.
The scope of the work.
Yeah, that's in 6311.
Mm-hmm.
Another question from the Q&A, which is about overtime again. I know there has been some conversations on how Quebec labor laws calculate overtime differently. Does the CTA override provincial labor laws? Arden, you're still muted.
They're different things, right? And they're two different kinds of overtime. In some cases, they aren't really all that compatible with the CTA, but no, the CTA overtime is calculated separately from anything that you would be entitled to under ESA. But we can negotiate conditions that are superior to anything in the ESA, but within the CTA, but we cannot change the conditions in any provincial labor law. So there is an inconsistency across the country as to how overtime is calculated under ESA. That's one of the reasons why Alan created that handy dandy document that he did, which will help people, particularly those who work in different provinces, understand what the differences will actually mean.
Another question from the chat. Is there an agreed way to submit personal leave requests?
I think it says in writing, but I could be mistaken.
Arden, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
Sorry, I was actually talking to myself, but thank you for reminding me. It's except in the case of emergencies, they have to provide the request in writing at least 1 week prior to the desired leave.
And then another question from the chat from Michael. Some SMs are interested in terminology of backstage manager or deck stage manager to be used interchangeably with assistant stage manager. What is the avenue to pursue this as an option?
Megan, Jessica, do you want to talk about that?
We did bring this up. yeah, it was interesting because there was I don't know how, I hope I don't sound too vague. I'm trying not to give everybody's secrets away. There was a lot of conversation about the specificity of assistant director choreographer and associate director choreographer in ways that we were trying to help people define the scope and the expectations of those jobs. And there was a moment when we realized that that understanding did not transfer to stage management, that the idea of an assistant stage manager, the word assistant was tripping people up. And so we, you know, as many of us have had those conversations about backstage or deck stage manager versus calling stage manager, show caller versus backstage, that we could get more specific with that. I have to say my memory is that it went over like a lead balloon because people couldn't sort of wrap their head around what if we're all just stage managers and some people do different jobs, because of the financial implications of it not being hierarchical. But we tried. I think we should keep trying because I personally, not speaking on behalf of anybody else, I agree that the terminology is inaccurate.
Yeah, and I will say, I think something that was very apparent coming out of these negotiations was that there is a gross misunderstanding of what stage managers and assistant stage managers do from administration. And I think that the more that we can advocate or make known what our jobs actually are and what we actually bring to these productions, the more we will be able to push for that change. Because I agree, like I do think that assistant stage managers are not assistants to stage managers. We have our own job requirements, our own list of duties, and the title does us a disservice, frankly. And not everybody might share that opinion, but that's mine. And I think that we need to make sure that people know what we bring to a production. And I think the more that we do that, we'll have more of a chance of changing it.
The best we could do was in 6310, when we changed the language that used to say under the direction of. And so in order to try and make the point across the table that an ASM position is not an inferior position, it's a separate job that has its own tasks and responsibilities, as Meghan said, we changed the language to say in collaboration with and under the supervision of the PSM and/or stage manager. And that was as far as we could get with them in terms of getting them to recognize in writing that they are two separate positions, need to be recognized as such, rather than one necessarily being considered in an inferior position to the other. But that's one of those things where you put it on the table and you don't quite get everything that you'd hope to, but hopefully this is the beginning of a greater ability for them to understand the distinctions between the roles.
And just to go back to Mike's question, to actually change the name of the position, if people wanted to pursue that avenue, would that be done through an RCA?
I'd say no. I mean, we can take this to the table, but part of the conversations, it wasn't just around this, was also around what does the community want? Before we go ahead and we make a significant change like that, we would want to have very significant consultation with the community to make sure that we were doing the right thing. So if that's something, I can tell you that it's happened on the ballet side. People used to be referred to as ballet masters or mistresses, and the consensus has been that now they should be referred to as rehearsal directors. And because that consensus was there, and people had done that consultation amongst themselves and each other, it was easy for us to come forward and make that change in the collective agreement. So we would want to, and if that's something that the stage management committee wants to undertake and needs assistance from the office to do, we're obviously more than happy to help. But as I said, there was something else. It was in workshops where we were concerned about making a certain change because we were not comfortable that we had enough consensus from the affected members.
Question about the pilot project. I know the occasional stage manager will get insurance during the production, but how does this affect off-contract insurance?
That's easy. It's a contract, it contributes to it. It's really simple. It will contribute towards the 8 weeks. Because your 8 weeks don't have to be 8 full complete weeks or consecutive weeks as well. So if
Arden, your internet just sort of froze and made a lot of what you said illegible. So I'm wondering if you're able to maybe re-say it again.
Sure. Sorry about that. And it's telling me little things come up saying your internet connection is unstable. Any amount of work under a full contract contributes towards your 8 weeks. That's not true under festival or collectives, but in a case like this, CTA contract, the week or days that you worked under contract would be added up to create 8 weeks in order to give you off-contract coverage. So the answer is yes, it will contribute.
I'm really sorry, but I've had something come up and I have to leave a little early. So I just want to say thank you very, very much and good luck with the rest of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Bye.
Another question from the Q&A. What is the max number of people who should receive the show report, not the text show report?
I believe, let me flip to the right number. I believe there's no longer a maximum. The previous language was, I think, trying in a very important way to maintain the confidentiality and the ability of stage managers to speak freely in the show report. The feedback that we got from many people was that limiting the number of people who could receive it was a barrier to things getting done. So for example, if you could only send it to 4 people at the production end, and that information wasn't being disseminated until 10 o'clock the next morning, things weren't being done before a matinee that needed to be done. So we consulted and decided that removing the maximum number of people would be worth trying, so that we could clarify that the show report should go to whoever needs to get it. So in consultation with the theater.
And then in that consultation to the theater, does 6313 now say that the theater needs to supply the show report template to the SM?
Yes. I haven't had anybody give me one yet. Most of the time when I say, do you like this? They say, yes, use that one. A lot of the conversation we had at the table was about, is the show report accomplishing the goal that we set for it? Like, are you actually getting the information you need from it? What do you want to know about the show report? I feel like myself as a stage manager, it's the piece of the puzzle that I know that, like, I don't know what other people's show reports look like very often. I don't know what information is included. And so it's the thing that sometimes it feels a bit like you're just sending something out into the void. So getting feedback on the template isn't meant to limit what you can talk about, but will hopefully give some guidance for the engagers to say, what do they actually need to know about the show? Are they concerned about the humidity in the auditorium? Do they need to know the house count from you, or do they get it from 6 people at front of house? You know, are we using this to track future insurance claims? And so they need more details about illness or injury. Yeah, the hope is that we just get a bit more guidance from the engager of what they need from the show report, and that we have the flexibility to communicate with whoever we need to make sure that tech notes or artistic notes are being dealt with.
Can you also maybe clarify something? So I know that the new clause says that there is no maximum number, but if we keep reading, it says that for repertory theater, that number increases to 6. Should we, is it still 6?
No, I think that's a vestigial grammar moment. It just didn't get caught in the proofreading.
It's been fixed in the new agreement.
Great.
Before we run out of time, I do encourage everyone to read the entire ratification package. But Jessica, in particular, are there any things that you feel like we haven't talked about that we'd like to highlight for people that came up that provide a sort of change in your day-to-day activities as a stage manager?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I can answer it very well.
Sorry.
Let me have a little think. Let me have a little think. I'll be right back.
While you think about that, Jess, to a question from Jethlo in the chat, I've worked on a recent show where the director/artistic director limited who would receive the show report, much to the detriment of the production. Any feedback?
Can't tell you how to do your job, but if the information isn't getting to where it needs to go, Jethlo, and there's a problem, you should speak up. You know, I don't know what the reasons are that the director or artistic director doesn't want to share that information with whomever they don't want to share it. But if it's causing problems in the show, you need to speak up and go to somebody and say, look, they should get the show report. And quite frankly, if they don't, and there's some sort of key information that you need translated to somebody, maybe you go and you give it to them yourself. I don't know. I mean, you can't, particularly if there's a health and safety issue, you certainly can't let that slip by, regardless of what it is that they're doing. So it does put some of the burden on you to speak up in that case, but to speak to somebody in authority and express your concerns about why it is that the restriction is actually causing problems. I'm just going to answer the next one. Yes, SMs will be sent paper copies of the new agreement when they're printed. We did that the last time because we know that our stage managers all would like to have a hard copy. As soon as it's out of the printer, we'll be running the list and we'll send it off.
Okay, the things that I think on top of the SM specific areas, I think there's really important new language in Article 10 in all of the clauses about equity, diversity, and inclusion that are worth us examining, both for understanding the rooms we work in, but also understanding the limits of what we have to take responsibility for. Speaking for myself, I know that I have over the last 5 years or longer felt a lot of responsibility to be an HR professional that I am not trained to be. So I think that there is good supports in Article 10. I think there's some new language in workshops that will be important for people to understand, just a few changes that clarify how that work is done. And the section as well that does talk about how apprentices work and are contracted in the way that is sort of important to understand. Those are the 3 that I think is most important. There was a question as well from Lorelei about choreographed transitions, and I'll speak on behalf of Meghan, who really spearheaded that. We were trying to articulate the difference between it's a very low light, somebody needs to go out and move that rock. They pick up the rock and they move it, versus somebody has to do 8 steps of a waltz count while wearing a very specific costume and pick up the rock in an artistic manner, time it out beautifully with the music and have it land perfectly center stage. So the idea of a choreographed transition was how much of it is functional and how much of it is like fulfilling an artistic vision. And I think that that came out of a couple of very specific situations where the expectations of what somebody could do in an emergency were unrealistic.
I think the example we used at the table, we kept saying, do not make your stage managers twirl. No twirling.
One question just from the Q&A, just about going back to show report. What's the purpose of the theater providing the show report template? Is it just for consistency?
Yes, as I say, I've never received one from a company. I've always used my own and said, "Is this what you want?" And they say yes, and I think that's great. So if they provide a template, I know what they want to know about the show. And then if I add to that or change that, we have a conversation about it. But again, it was trying to make it a little more transparent for people coming into a new company, so that we understand what people expect to receive from us, instead of having to just create it on our own every time. Am I confident that I'm going to get a template from every company that I work from? It will be a process of growth, I think.
Are there any other questions about any of the new CTA, any of the clauses, or anything?
Of course, somebody's bound to think of something that you didn't think of now, as soon as we hang up. So, feel free to reach out to me or Margaret. We'll answer the question. We're happy to do that if something, as I said, comes up that you think of. And of course, if anything comes up that, doesn't seem to be working for whatever reason, please let us know about that too.
I'd like to highlight the improved language in 6325 around use of personal computers and phones. Thank you for that. And just wanting to make sure, because a lot of people are still maybe not aware that we are supposed to be charging for use of our personal computers. So I just really wanted to highlight that for everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. We had a big conversation about what a reasonable computer is. Like, desktop from 1986 that runs to a dot matrix printer that's located in the marina half a block down from the rehearsal hall is maybe not going to be sufficient to the demands of a design team working out of Dropbox and on Zoom. So yeah, there was some important work done on that. And I don't want to speak for Megan, but I will say we found it incredibly helpful going into these negotiations, knowing what an active and an involved community of stage managers there were who had contributed to the questionnaire that the SM committee created, that had put in, thoughts for negotiation, who had emailed Margaret, who had come to us privately, who had shared their experiences, good and bad. So although it was the two of us on the team, we felt like we had a tremendous amount of information from the community. Is that filtered through my own prejudices and experience? Probably, of course. But we really felt like we could have an understanding of what challenges we were facing. And a lot of that came from the work the committee did to inform us of how other people are working. So I want to thank the committee for that too, going in.
I think we have time for one more question. And so, question from Lorelei. If we find a company isn't agreeing to new terms, especially with overtime, who should we reach out to?
I mean, if it's a CTA company or an ITA company, you can send your concern to myself, and then I would have the appropriate business representative assist you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to start wrapping up. As Randy has put in the chat, if you have more questions, there were a few questions in the Q&A we didn't get a chance to answer. So if you want to send them to either Margaret or Arden, or Margaret and Arden, you can do so. I also just wanted to take a moment to highlight the SM committee. The SM committee does a lot of really wonderful work. A lot of the great documents that are used were created by the SM committee. And if you are thinking, oh, this is something I like, and I have something I would really like to be made, Please feel free to reach out to the committee or even join the committee if you would like. I also want to highlight the ratifications or the new CTA fee increases. Please vote. Your voting and your input, as we've discussed, is really important to deciding the future of our association. Our association is built on the needs and the requirements of our members. Yes, the dues referendum. Please vote. We need everybody's opinion. We don't want to make decisions on the behalf of a small number of people when there are a large amount of people who feel there are some issues that, or maybe perspectives we haven't thought about when it comes to these issues. Arden, did I miss anything?
No, that's good. Thank you for that. If anybody has any questions about the rationale for the dues increase, we've provided a certain amount of information to you. There's some on the website as well. And we're always happy to talk to you about it. And you can always reach out to your local counselor or your stage management counselors as well if you have questions about the need and necessity for dues increase at this moment in time.
Great question just popped into the chat, Stephen. How can people access the recording if they weren't able to join us live?
I believe this is being recorded, and once it's done, I'll connect with Randy and we'll see about how we can send this out to members who couldn't be here for all of it or only a part of it. I just want to say also special thanks to you, Jess, and to Megan, even though she left. I know the negotiations were really tough and there was a lot of things happening at once and there were a lot of discussions. And so I just want to thank you both for all of the work that you've done to getting all of these new things and pilot projects on the table.
I'll say thanks on behalf of Megan too. It felt like really important work, and that we're hoping to represent our community as best we could in those situations. And we had so much support from Arden and Margaret and the whole team at Equity. It was hard but good.
Sometimes very, very late at night.
Thank you, everybody. That brings us sort of to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for attending, for asking such wonderful questions.
Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate the input and the concerns coming from our members. It helps me and Margaret as we go forward, and it gives us an idea of things to look out for in terms of the changes that we've made to the agreement. So thank you all very much.